Greetings, everyone. This mini lecture is going to go over the project discussion board posts you have to do for three of our main projects this semester. I'm going to do a review of the task, go over some general grading comments you may see, and also talk about some reading like a writer suggestions. So the task and review, what you are asked to do. Now, this review is not to replace looking at the discussion board directions, but it's taking the highlights. So for the initial posts, you were asked to make comments that demonstrate the value of a technique for you as a writer. And you were also asked to provide an example of how you or someone else might use the technique. Now, this is information that you're reading from our textbook. So when you are replying for those initial posts on Blackboard, you are talking about your learning. So you should be speaking from first person and demonstrating how you understand the technique as a writer, not just defining what it means. So this is part of the being able to make a reflective response. It's not just describing what you did or defining, it's trying to interpret what that technique brings to you as a writer. When it comes to the activities, if you complete an activity, your task is to post a comment that lets us know the value, the learning value you got from the activity, and to provide some evidence of what you completed. That is not the same as delivering just the activity. Again, it's asking you to think about what you learned from completing that activity, and the activities build off of the techniques. So we are looking for your understanding and not just descriptions. When it comes to the synthesis posts, we're moving away from just your learning to thinking about what you are learning along with your classmates. And that's why you're asked to look at what other people have written for their initial responses. Think about what you are learning, what you are beginning to learn, and create a response. So synthesize your learning. A response is going to present your take on what people learned from these tasks. So that is an inclusive collective learning. The synthesis post shouldn't just be about what my classmates learned, but it's about us, what you have decided in a thesis statement that was learned by looking at that particular content for that chapter. And you have a choice here. Your thesis, your synthesis should include a thesis statement. Now you have an option. You can provide an explicit thesis statement or an implied claim or thesis. Now you will see many of my comments. Maybe I'll say, hey, you need a clearer thesis statement. So if you are able to weave a nice implied thesis statement, that's great. But if not, for this type of writing, you have to think what is best. Most likely a clear thesis statement, something that explains from this activity or from the reading and discussion of chapter 6, it's clear to me that one of the collective takeaways from this chapter on reflective thinking was how to use description supportively. So that's like a thesis statement and it's clear. So you have that choice, but if you are going to go for an implied thesis statement, that's going to require you to do probably a lot more writing. That implied claim is more like the reflective essay we did for project 1. So that's the task. Now you're going to see a number of comments for this first round of feedback that you got on the discussion board. What I'm showing here on the screen is just a collection of the variety of things individual people may see. So it's just like a list of overall comments. Now, keeping in mind that when you're responding, your initial responses, that's when you are responding to the techniques and activities that is focused on your personal learning. So you should use I. And when you're responding to the synthesis, that learning includes you. It's not just about your classmates, it's about you and your classmates. And you get to decide what the learning takeaway is for you and your classmates. And that's why it's good to have a strong thesis somewhere to say, this is what I see we are learning. And then you're using information from your classmates to help support that. I will always just forever say, people, watch out for filler words, vague phrases, and repetition. And you want to use concrete detail choices instead. Specifically, the synthesis response, it needs to have a main point. Again, if you want to be more creative and make your point sort of spread out throughout the whole thing, you can shoot for an implied thesis statement. But one of the readings that you had was, I think it's by Hinton, and it was, so you've got a writing assignment. So trying to understand a writing assignment and bring the best choices to that. So I'm going to tell you, even though you can use an implied thesis, this type of writing probably will be easier to do and get through if you just have a clear main point, or a clear thesis statement. I'm looking for synthesis posts that make connections between the cited material, that's the information you're pulling from your classmates, and your ideas. So your ideas have to still rule that thesis statement, and it's not just what other people are saying. It's you bringing together, synthesizing your learning with others to say something new about what that specific takeaway is. I'm looking, I think, for a synthesis that have more reflective thoughts about the learning experiences and takeaways. People are doing a really good job of describing what techniques are and what they and reiterating what their classmates have said, but they're not going beyond saying, well, so what? What does that mean? What is the overall learning? And that's the reflective analytical application in addition to just describing stuff. I also will suggest people start to use this activity, especially the synthesis, to think about reviewing for your paragraph choices. Knowing that a paragraph should have one topic sentence. And if that throws you, you should review content on topic sentences. And I do have some suggestions for how to do that. You next will see a next step. And the next step is pretty much the same for everybody. And this first time around, I'll say, hey, look at the rubric. If there's a grading rubric and for the task, look at the rubric and look at the comments if there are additional comments, and then make some time to come talk to me. I'm telling everyone to please review the replying reflective responses. It's in the Blackboard glossary, and it has a video. And I've also probably gave you a direct link to that video on reflective writing. So the synthesis post you're making and the initial post requires you to think reflectively and not just descriptively. And then I also tell people, please review the synthesis post example because you have one. Review it, use it as a model, not as an item to copy. Okay, I'm just going to open that here for a second. So when I say, please do not use this as an item to copy, that goes from like the introduction, like these first two sentences. If I read things that look just like this, what stood out to me, this is here as a model, not as this is exactly what you need to do. So think about how this is set up and put together. And one of the things that this does a good job of doing is making sure it talks about collective learning, not just what my classmates learned, but what this person learned along with their classmates. So I'll come back to this in this overview. And then I say, use everything that you've done for a task, the rubric, any comments, and use that to go back and look at some of the writing choices you're making. So there's an activity that one of many lessons you did was your writing habits. I strongly suggest you continue to work on that task throughout the semester. And so you will see me often say, hey, use this particular piece of writing, read it like a writer, and go see what kinds of writing choices you're making and add to that your writing habits list. You should keep one. This is, if you keep that task and keep growing it and looking at it, it'll actually help you make some different choices. Okay, here are my suggestions for using these smaller writing activities, like this specific, these initial and synthesis posts for the chapters that we're reading, using them as opportunities to read like a writer and go back and analyze what you've written, because they're smaller chunks and you can get a handle for your decision making on various levels. So here are some of those examples. You can use it, your synthesis post and your initial post here, to review the sentence types. So review the types of sentence types you already use. And if you don't know the sentence types, there are 4 main sentence types. There is a mini lesson on it in the discussion board. I strongly suggest you take a look and complete that. I'm not going to tell everyone to complete it because everyone doesn't need to, but understanding the 4 basic sentence types and using that mini lesson as a way to review them. And then you can start looking for them in your writing. So you can go back to your initial posts and your synthesis posts and say like, hey, how often do I use simple sentences? Do I ever use compound complex sentences? But before you even do that, you might need to review them and see what they are. You can also look for these things in other people's writings. So I also suggest that people review topic sentences and how they work, and also paragraphing choices. And there are some resources on Blackboard, and you will always hear me say, look these things up on Purdue OWL. Here's the other part. So the synthesis post is really helpful for looking at how you cite sources in a low risk task, because most of the time you will be citing sources in other classes, in larger pieces of writing, in research papers, or in other documents that have higher stakes. So read your synthesis post like a writer and pay attention for how you're citing sources. Some of the things you want to pay attention to is the choices you have for how you insert and where you insert cited material into your sentences, using things like signal phrases and front loading. These are 2 items that you will find in the Abrams text, but you can also find how to integrate sources in my sentences in Purdue OWL. So yes, I'm just saying where you can find some of these things. You can look at how other writers are integrating sources and take note for what you see them doing. See the model text in the Abrams book. One point is, if you're going to cite material, always surround that cited material with your words and your voice. So if you introduce it, it should be introduced. The cited material should come after you say something. And when you're done citing it, you should have some follow-up words for it. The punctuation, as far as the parenthetical references in your in-text citations, You just want to double check those. And that should be something you go back to do before you call something done. It's a tedious process, but it's pretty easy to check it, to go back and check that stuff. Make sure your voice, your thoughts, and your ideas are still present in the writing. So that synthesis post you do for this, for the tasks of the chapter, what your classmates say should not take over that reflective synthesis post. So yeah, your voice needs to always be present. Some additional resources just to think about. So additional resources for learning more about the items I listed above on the previous slides, use Purdue OWL. Look at Blackboard and look at our glossary entries for different citation styles. If you use Purdue OWL, yes, use it for looking at citation styles, sentence structure, and all of that jazz. There's Abrams chapters 9 and 6, both talk about how to integrate sources. And the information literacy toolkit task, which you will get to at some point this semester, is another resource for learning about how to integrate sources. But basically, remember that all a habit is a repeated action. They're not necessarily good or necessarily bad. I want you to think about your writing habits and start to pinpoint them so you can make different choices. So the point of reading your writer like a writer is that identify those habits. Once you know them, you can make better choices. So that's my overview for the task of posting initial and synthesis posts on Blackboards, and some of my comments and reading like a writer suggestions. The reason I say so much about an assignment that's so small is because you're using like all of these writing skills at on a very small, low risk type of writing. And so if you use that writing to think about how you can improve it, that will help you improve your larger writing tasks.